Please welcome Matt Crowe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for both introductions. I was not expecting that first one. That hit me a little hard this morning. It is a pleasure to be here. Real quick thing about Craig Hospital. If you don't know what it is a brain and spine rehab hospital. And I would make a huge argument that it is one of the crown jewels of American healthcare. And that's why I'm on the board there. If you take a look at Craig versus any other hospital, and I mean all the other top ones, New York, Boston, Atlanta, Houston, if you go to Craig with a spinal cord or traumatic brain injury, your average stay in any other hospital will be 21 days due to insurance, because rehab insurance is horrific. And so you could have a stroke, you cannot speak, you cannot walk, you cannot swallow, you have to learn all again, and you're in that hospital for 21 days. The average for Craig for brain is 89. The average for spine is 72. And no matter what insurance says, if they think you need to be there longer, you're there longer, and they pay for it. They run programs that nobody else in the country runs, especially around aggressive behavioral psychology, because 30% of all traumatic brain injury patients become very aggressive and violent. And they've shifted the entire paradigm on how to deal with that, and that's actually gone into other aspects of care, including spinal cord and some other things. But they're the only hospital in the world that does that because it doesn't get reimbursed. So they are plowing the way for other facilities to be able to get reimbursed for that. And the last thing is that if you take a look at, I think, the two biggest pieces for Craig, I didn't realize I was going to be sitting up here kind of giving a promotional piece for Craig, but nobody knows who they are, and they're one of the greatest institutions on the planet. 50% is the number. If you go to Craig versus the second, third, or fourth registered or ranked program for what they do, you have a 50% higher chance of return to work, working again, and 50% higher quality of life metrics. It is absolutely off the charts. So now you know a little bit more about Craig. So my talk today is about transformation in the face of adversity. And my hope is that I'm going to poke you a little bit. We're going to take my story, we're going to blend it with God's story, and we're going to try and take all that and blend it with your story. I think we all go through our own individual journeys. But what's so important is that we help each other through those journeys. And that's, we talked last night, and hearing the mission, the idea, everything about New Canaan on why it was founded, and that is just the core of what it is. So I can't tell you how honored I am to be able to just be here to speak with you today. I have spent a very large amount of time on this subject, transformation, a very large amount of time. And no matter where I've looked, theologically, psychology, I've spent a lot of time in psychology, philosophically, this is the single greatest blueprint for transformation of the human spirit anywhere on the planet. And I think you could argue that the person who wrote it probably has suffered just about more than anybody save Job. And I just want to read it. So we glory in our suffering because we know suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. One of the things that I want to mention about that to start off with is those are bound. You literally have suffering, perseverance, character, hope. They are bound. You do not get one without the others. And no matter where you look, no matter pretty much the religion, the theology, the psychology, philosophy, it all comes back to that. And so I just think it's beautiful. The other part that I don't have an answer for you, I could, but I think it's better just to kind of dwell on it as I'm talking and as you go through, is you kind of glaze over those first few words. So we glory in our suffering. Who glories in suffering? Cancer, death of a loved one, financial hardship, job loss. Who glories in that? But the second part is because we know. And I find that to be such an interesting statement. And as you begin to unpack that, over time, whatever your own story is or stories of others, you see that. You see that transpire. So I need to tell you a little bit about who I was. And you already saw a picture of my family, but this is me before June 23rd, 2018. I had accepted Christ as my Savior ever since I can remember. But I had a much stronger relationship with the world, much stronger relationship with the world than I did with God or with Jesus. And I didn't even know who that Holy Spirit guy was. I didn't know what that was all about. And kind of scared me. And so I had what I think a lot of people have, and I think it just happens by default, and I had an incomplete belief system or an incomplete life view. And what I mean is that I grew up and I sort of cobbled together my views on life. I took a little bit from the Bible from growing up. I took a lot from my own experiences, good, bad, right, wrong, or indifferent, and those just got mashed in, no matter whether I was even thinking the right way about them or not in reflecting on those experiences. Cultural myth, half-truths, and I wanted to be the self-made American male. And so if any of you ever decide that you know what that is, please come tell me, because I still have no idea what that means. I love the way Arnold Schwarzenegger, he said it, I think in a commencement speech, that he just said, "I've never met a self-made man." And it's such a beautiful statement. But because of that incomplete life view, I was always trying to fill a hole. Nothing was ever good enough. Nothing was ever enough. I always needed to have my chart going up to the right in all metrics, right? I had to have more money, bigger house, better vacations, all of that. And I'm just glad I'm in a part of the country that's never affected anybody here. So I really like being here for that. But that all changed how do I go back? That all changed in 2018. I was training for a bike ride, and it's actually a ride called the Triple Bypass. It's one of the hardest road cycle rides in North America. It is 120 miles. It's 11,000 feet of elevation gain. You go from just outside of Denver all the way to Vail, if you know that distance, because it's pretty big, and then into Avon, which is even further. And so I had been training for it, and I had trained for it the year before, but they had fires, so they canceled it on that year. And then I was cross-training with some friends in Aspen on a mountain bike just to get some exercise in, and they were all much better mountain bikers than me, and they were down further than I was, way ahead of me, and I tried to get around a little tree. I hit a rock, and I was vaulted. Bike came to a stop, and I was vaulted backwards with my feet going over my head when my head hit the ground, and then I just hit the turf, and it all happened so fast. But as I sort of got my wits about me, my hand was laying out in front of my face, and I'm on the ground, halfway in the dirt. My glasses got blown off my face, and I was in a crouched fetal position, and my breathing was hard, fast, and shallow. That's what it was like. Every breath that would come out would kick sand into my glasses and right back into my eyes. And it burned, and I wanted to get up. And I went to go do a push-up with this arm, and the only thing that happened was my thumb twitched. And I kind of took a minute, and I said, well, that was odd. Let's try that again. So I calmed myself down, and I went to do that push-up, and the only thing that happened was my thumb twitched. I checked my arms, nothing. I checked my legs, nothing. And I spent, a lot of my career in medicine, and it was pretty obvious I was a quad at that time and paralyzed. And I had full panic. And for me, panic was a freight train of thoughts coming right through my head. One came in only to just zip right out and be replaced by another. Am I going to die right here? Is anyone ever going to find me? Gosh, will I live? Will I ever see my wife again? Will I ever hold my kids in my lap and smell their hair? I don't know why that thought came to me, but it did. And if I do live, what kind of burden am I going to be? And as I cycled through that for I don't know how long, a few minutes, I tried to get my wits back about me, and I heard this noise, and I could not figure out what it was for a few minutes. It kept kind of starting and then stopping, and I couldn't tell if it was another hiker. I couldn't tell if it was an animal. I couldn't tell if it was another biker coming down. And after a couple of minutes, I realized it was my cell phone vibrating in my backpack behind me. And it was the single greatest collision of hope and despair I've ever had in my entire life. hoping that that's how we communicate. My friends are calling me. They are trying to save me if they knew what was going on. And it may as well have been on the far side of the moon because I was never going to grab that phone. And it was surreal. I would hear it buzz and I'd just, oh, grab your phone. And nothing happens. And that just kept happening over and over and over. And I went that way for 20 minutes until the next rider found me. I'm going to just advance past that because we don't have enough time. But eventually, they bring me down to Aspen Valley Medical Center. They take this image, and that then gets transferred to one of my best friends, who's a spine surgeon down in Denver, who comes into the hospital to operate on me. And normally, I tell people that if you know what this is, then you understand it. But pretty much, I've had 80 spine surgeons. I think it's close enough to say that I'm at 100. And 100 out of 100 spine surgeons will tell you that patient's never going to move again. I've heard everything from he's done, he'll never move again, to I'm sorry for your loss, to I've seen hundreds of patients that look like that, and not one of them ever moved again. And so like so many ordinary people who go through an extraordinary event, I had started my day with one reality, and as my day was ending, I was facing a very different reality. And so was my wife. My wife had come to the hospital just expecting me to have a couple of broken bones. And in the course of 60 minutes, she saw my thumb acting very weird, is what she would say, knew I needed to have immediate spine surgery, heard my best friend say it's one of the worst cases he's ever seen, only to be taken to the compassion room by the chaplain. And as she comes into the compassion room, she kind of looks at him and says, well, why are you taking me to the compassion room? And he says, there's a very real chance that your husband's not coming out of this tonight. She fell to the floor in that compassion room and wailed out to God, just wailed out to God. And we have friends who we now consider definitely family, who are in that room, and they say that in that moment, they don't know what happened, and no one can remember what she said. But they say they either witnessed or were part of a miracle in that moment. And I always make sure to bring that up because no matter what is happening, never underestimate the power of prayer, ever. And I've seen her do small prayers, big prayers. I think she's got the red phone directly to the big man, and it's pretty amazing. But my surgery then lasted 8 hours, and when I woke up, I can tell you officially I was suffering. From the neck down, I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't move. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't go to the bathroom by myself. In order to call a nurse, I had to use a faceplate, and if the faceplate was a little too far away on the bed, I couldn't call a nurse. I had no idea what my future was going to look like, what was going to happen, but from the neck up, it's the most pain that I've ever experienced in my entire life. They literally crucify you onto your implants with those screws, with those 12 screws. And the only way to describe it is that I was hanging on a meat hook. It's the only way to describe how that felt. And so I think in that moment I can officially say I was suffering. And over the next week and a half, this is how they moved me. And then this is me brushing my teeth. About a week and a half later, I'm actually getting some twitch in my toe, and it's me brushing my teeth for the first time.
Oh my goodness. Ow.
Now, everybody's going to experience suffering differently. And in Craig Hospital, they always say everybody's a snowflake. Nobody experiences the same thing, and it's remarkable how true that is. But in my suffering, in my story, probably the thing I'd like to mention most is that I was always very present in the moment before my accident, but this changed things in a whole different direction to a new level, where yesterday and tomorrow they just vanished. They just went away, and all that matters that moment in that bubble of the day is what we called it, just that day. And by being hyper-present in the moment, all the jaded things that had happened to me in life, people cutting you off, people, trying to get ahead of you or fire you at work or whatever it was, all that jadedness just started to get chipped away because in my present moment, I knew how hard it was just to move a finger, and sometimes it didn't move no matter how hard you tried. I noticed how many people showed up. There were 5,000 to 10,000 people who ended up praying for me, and it was like 5,000 to 10,000 candles in the darkest night. I noticed how so many people I knew and didn't know showed up out of nowhere, and how hard my staff and everybody at my hospitals was there to be in it to win it with me. And that all culminated one night at about 1 a.m, and I'm lying in bed, and I just explode crying. And I can't breathe. I can't wipe my face really well. And it wasn't because why me? It wasn't because I didn't deserve this. It was because I finally began to realize that I was being hit with an unstoppable tidal wave of love that would not stop for the next 90 days. And it broke my heart in the single greatest way possible. And there's a verse that talks about turning a heart of stone into a heart of flesh. And I don't know about that, but in that moment, on that night, I felt a massive chunk of stone rip off my heart. Never felt it before, and never felt it again. And that brings me to my points on suffering. Number one is, in all things, there's your part and there's God's part. And there's things that if they're too big for you or they're out of your control, give them to Him. But you still are always dedicated to take care of your part. And you need to know what that is. And for me, it was a still small voice. It showed up right in the very beginning, and it just kept telling me, sit, listen, and watch. No matter what I did, no matter I was in therapy, people were coming to see me, it did not matter. And that voice was the Holy Spirit. But I had, prior to my accident, been running so fast and not paying attention and not creating margin in order to actually hear the great advocate. And so my question, this gets into mostly Christianity, but a little bit of psychology, because I think it's very important. I've studied a lot of suffering, PTSD, PTG, post-traumatic growth. And number one is always, instead of asking God to pull you out of your misery and your suffering, and I don't blame you if you do, but invite Him into the fire with you, because He's already there and you just need to acknowledge it. Number two is, are you creating margin for that still, soft voice? It is hard to listen to, and there are so many things that are trying to pull you away and steal your margin, from social media to work to everything else, and you have to create that margin in that space in order to get that voice. And to be honest, I never had that voice until my accident. And lastly, this one really has to do with a lot of psychology, but in suffering, when you're suffering, sometimes you're just white-knuckling it, and you get reprieve in micro packets, just microseconds. And then eventually it becomes maybe a second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, and it begins to build. And it's in that margin, in that space, that you begin to understand or assemble what it's going to mean to you later on and how you're going to handle it. Are you going to be better, or are you going to be bitter? And it really gets down to that basic point. But most importantly, you need to have loved ones. And that's what's so beautiful about New Canaan. You need to have loved ones that are there in your corner that you can trust. And if you don't ever feel you have that, I already know that it exists in this room like nobody's business, but local pastors, whatever it is, you need to find that, because it's key and it's instrumental. Now for me, moving on, I got some pretty big wins pretty fast. So this is week 3, I think. And these are my first steps. I cannot tell you how stiff my legs, they were boards. And, but I started to get my legs back, and I got my right arm back. And you can tell in this photo that that's all happening, but if you take a look at my left arm, it's in a cradle because it won't work. My left arm, my left hand just won't work. And I have been given so many gifts, but I had to make a choice with my therapist and with myself. I had about this much energy every day. And literally, I'd be wiped out after physical therapy, and I'd sleep the rest of the day. And it was apparent that over time, we had put my left arm on the back burner because brush my teeth, feed myself, learn to use utensils, walk. That's huge. But it was time that we really need to address that left arm. And after a very spirited debate on the subject, my therapist finally acquiesced. And so they hooked up all these electrodes to my arm. And they turned them on, and I watched my arm. Couldn't feel it. Looked like a disembodied arm moving in bizarre Frankenstein ways, and it was scary. And I kind of looked at the therapist, and he looked back at me and he said, all right, let me try moving the electrodes around a little bit. Do it again. And that arm, same thing. And I look at him and I say, you are lighting up every house in my neighborhood. I need you to tell me how to go upstairs and turn on the light in my bedroom. And he just looked at me like a deer in the headlights. And he's like, son, that's not what we do. We can try to get you there, but only you can walk through that door. And while I had gotten a lot of wins, this was a very hard slap across the face that I was not expecting. And I had to decide, well, how am I going to handle it? What am I going to do? I have to make a choice. And it's another point that I'd like to make is outside of God, there's only two constants on this planet. It's change and it's choice. That's it. And I had to choose what I was going to do. And so I sort of took my own advice and said, there's certain parts that I need to leave to God, but I'm going to take care of what I can take care of. I'm going to pray. I'm going to meditate and have visualization and try to make a fun game about let's go find Matt's left arm. That's what I did. And then finally one night at about 1 in the morning, I don't know why it always happened at 1 in the morning, but it did. And I'm in the pitch black and I'm laying there and I can't move this arm. And I could feel my nerves in ways that I can't even feel them now and that none of you have ever experienced. And that's because everything gets lit up and they burn. They feel bizarre, tingling and stuff like that. And I just feel this hard burn start in my shoulder and I move it down trying to get to my finger and it just keeps going. I'm like, I found it. I can't believe this. This is amazing. So I tell my therapist the next day and he's like, show me. So I put my arm on the table and I go through the whole motion, just I feel that burn go all the way down to my finger, and nothing happens. And he goes, give it another shot. I focus on it, and I have that burn go all the way down, and nothing happens. And he goes, two things. Number one, you're looking in the wrong place. All your muscles that make your finger go like that, they're not down here, they're up in your forearm, and they're all twitching. You found it. But number two is, gravity's not your friend. It is so hard to even begin to move and overcome gravity that most people don't acknowledge or even understand that. And sure enough, after 3 days of hardcore grit, I finally got that finger to move. And that's what brought my left arm back. And that brings me to perseverance. Perseverance, I always had thought, was about busting through a wall or getting over that wall. And that's what it always made me think of. But when you really look at the original translation in this verse, it is to stay under. It is to let that work be done as you're pushing through and persevering. The biggest point of it is that you are changed. And so the two questions I have on perseverance: are you remaining faithful no matter what? And I have a great therapist, we all call him Yoda, and he said, my favorite part of that story is are you looking in the wrong place? Drugs, porn, could be ESPN Sports Center that you're just fully checking out and not addressing the issues, trying to sweep it under the rug. Are you remaining faithful no matter what? Because I may not gotten my left arm back. It may have never come back, but I'd still be here today. I'd just be telling a different story. And then second is habits are the breakdown of first thoughts and then thought followed by action. And in the very little things all the way to the big things, where are those taking you? Are they taking you in the right direction or are they taking you in the wrong direction? Because again, you know people who have made it through things and they have that grit, but there's that old guy who made it through everything who's miserable. And my question is did he persevere? Or did he just show grit? And then moving on, that little voice inside me that said, I want you to sit, listen, and watch, it changed its tune about right here. So they started throwing me on a bike because walking was still kind of hard and impactful, especially when you don't know how to do it. You're just shocking all your joints because you're not fluid at all. So they put me on a bike, and I loved a bike. So that little voice started telling me third time's a charm. And to me, what that meant is you need to make a third attempt at the triple bypass 1 year from your accident. And I had to, at first my wife was my biggest cheerleader. She's like, sure, you can do it. We're all about it. And then as soon as it started coming around December, January, I got in touch with Team Evergreen, who runs the triple. All of a sudden my wife changed her tune, and she is like, I don't know about this. And I got a lot of feedback, but that little voice, and for a lot of reasons, I had decided that I really wanted to make that attempt. And we did it in a safe way. So my spine surgeons, the hospital, they wrote it with me. And so I had this whole team sign up to do it with me. And then Team Evergreen even gave me a world-class trainer. Guys run the Sahara. He's done just about everything that you can do. And he's just a great trainer. And so he said, you're going to be on a bike for a minimum of 10, probably 12 hours. I was not prepared for him to tell me that. But we kept going through it. And just on the outskirts of Denver is a mountain that everybody cycles. It's called Lookout Mountain. And it's got great climb, and then you come back down, so it's great practice. And when I got there and climbing it, I was climbing it pretty slow, but I was even slower coming down. I was scared. That speed on that bike, and mostly because my left arm is so weak, having that control of the steering column, I just didn't have. And every time I'd apply the brakes, it's all my weight is on this arm, and it's just fatiguing it. And I could not go faster than 12 miles an hour. We kept riding day by day. I could not go faster than 12 miles an hour downhill. And I was becoming more tired on the descent than I was on the climb. And finally, it became apparent that when you do the math, there's not enough hours in daylight that it would have taken me to complete it. But we stayed with it, because it's not about necessarily completing it. It's getting back everything that we could get back from me safely. You only have 2 years to get back all your neural function you're ever going to get. That's it. And so I wanted to capitalize on that. And one day, we get to the bottom, and he's got this huge smile on his face. He goes, dude, you went 15 miles an hour. And I got to tell you, I was 5 years old, and it was Christmas morning. It was the single greatest day, and I couldn't have been more happy. But it's so much bigger than that. Because one of the things that I didn't realize is how many areas of my world and of my life I had begun to box myself in. Tell myself who I wasn't anymore, what I can do, what I can't do, who I should be, who I shouldn't be. And I had no idea what those 3 little mile an hour meant. Eventually, I made 15, 18, 25, 27, and got all the way up to full speed. But those 3 miles an hour were much bigger than any bike ride on any day. And that brings me to character. And I love this word, because the original translation of this word is the same one that Jesus used when he says, who is engraved on this coin? And that's what character means. What is engraved on you? What is being engraved on you? We've got a lot of people who've done a lot of great things and have a lot of great things in their future. But whatever that goal is that you're doing, it's not about the attainment of that goal. It's about who you become in the attainment of that goal or through your journey. Again, is it making you better? Or is it making you bitter? And I love that part on it. And the one thing that I will tell you in all my research, writing, journaling, speaking with people, is the fastest way to shift your character. This is a quote that is not in the Bible, but it is of the Bible. And it's one of my favorite quotes of all time. You either lead your life by your commitments or you are led by your addictions. Amen. That is a real quote, and it is real life. And it dovetails or fits in completely with one of my other favorite quotes by Lewis Smedes. You are mostly who you become in life by making wise promises and keeping them. Fastest way to improve your character. Right there. So you probably have a pretty good idea what 2 questions are coming. Number 1 is what's being engraved upon you. Through your daily thoughts, your daily actions, your daily habits, small and big, where are they taking you? And my second is what wise promises can you make and keep? And that brings us, oh, no. So this is my team. That's right. This is my team for the triple bypass. This is everybody who was mostly to help me get there, but also to protect me from crazy riders who weren't paying attention. So they were kind of a blockade. This is all of us at the beginning. This is me and my spine surgeon, Lonnie. At the end. Great day. And these are my two spine surgeons at a gratitude gathering that we had. Just superheroes. And that brings me to hope. And I want to bring another verse in for hope. And it's Ephesians 2:10. So, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus, to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Now, I know most of you have probably heard another translation on this, for we are God's masterpiece. I'm his masterpiece. You are his masterpiece. Everyone in this room is his masterpiece. But my favorite is the original Greek translation, which is poema. I am God's poem, spoken in his story, history. All of us are. This is a hard story to start, but about a year ago, I got a call from somebody I was at Craig Hospital with. He was another patient, and he didn't get the same outcome that I got. He didn't get a miracle. He had had a really hard road since then, and he called me and left me a message and said, please call me back. I have 48 hours to live. And so I called him back, and we had a beautiful conversation. And we talked about riding bikes on the other side of the horizon, and see you soon. And in the softest voice, and in the kindest way, he asked me, why you? Why did you get a miracle? And I didn't. And I told him that was the single greatest question I have been trying to answer ever since. And in all my research, all my study in Scripture, everything that I've ever done, it leads to one point with two parts to that answer. And number one is, I don't. I don't deserve it. And everything points back to the cross. Because that is the single greatest miracle given to anyone. And it is given to every single one of us. And I got to tell you, you talked about the blind man, or someone talked about the blind man. I'm the paralytic man. Your sins are forgiven. Now get up and walk. I'm the paralytic man, and I will take my miracle all day long, twice on Sunday, but it pales in comparison to the other one. It really does. And so that's the number one point that I want to make, is how valuable that is. And the second part is Ephesians. Because I have been put on this planet, and my purpose is to do good work. My purpose is to share my story with you today, as we all are. And that leads to my final two questions for you on hope. So what are you thankful for in your journey? And it's not just your gifts, your talents, your treasure. It's your challenges and your adversity. Because all of them mix in. And I will tell you that my greatest weakness has easily become my greatest strength. And lastly is, what are you going to do with them? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do for the kingdom, for the gifts that you've been given? And that is my talk. Thank you. Let me take this off.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Matt's agreed to do a Q&A with us, thinking that usually when he gives this talk, people have some questions.
Yeah, so Matt, welcome. My name is Chip. Matt, we haven't met yet, but we have an interesting connection in that you suffered an extraordinary event that resulted in an orthopedic injury And I trained in orthopedics for most of my early life. And, as I looked at that image, the thing that came to mind, Matt, was the blind man who received his sight. And, he stood there before the Sanhedrin and said, "All I know is I was blind and now I see." And I'm really grateful for you coming and sharing your testimony and giving God the glory for what clearly is a miracle. Because that x-ray, I've never seen anything like it. In all of my years working in orthopedics at Mass General and the Beth Israel Deaconess and Children's, I've never seen anything like it. And I've seen a lot of things that are far, far less significant on x-ray that resulted in irreparable, devastating harm. So the idea that this man is sitting here, looking at me, appearing to be completely with all of his faculties, is just a testimony of what God will do in each one of our lives to allow us to enjoy his goodness, to be agents of his love, and for his glory. God bless you.
First of all, amen to the miracle. Thanks for being with us. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with your wife? You said she was wailing in prayer initially, and then how was it throughout that journey? Did it bring you closer? Could you talk about that a little?
It's so interesting. I had predictions of when I first created this talk and this presentation about the number one things that people would ask. This is by far the number one. There's a number two that's out there too, but this is by far the number one. My wife easily was the spiritual leader of the household. Easily. She has a PhD in the Bible. Wow. I'm about on a high school level now. I'm getting pretty good. But she's amazing. And the number one thing that I will tell you is that when we get married, we sign up for better or for worse. And she proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that she signed up for the worst. And, it's really interesting that one of the things you don't ever realize until you get into that situation is how you have to deal with certain things. And when you have a spinal cord injury, they have to test you all the time to make sure eventually that you can go to the bathroom by yourself. And there's very specific tests for that, because what happens is your spinal cord gets cut, you can't tell yourself to go to the bathroom. And you have to do what's called a bowel program if that is the way that you're going to be in for the rest of your life. You actually have to, this is a little graphic, but you have to go and actually stimulate the anus in order to create peristalsis so that you will actually go to the bathroom, otherwise you don't. It is an hour that someone has to do for you every night if you're in that situation. And my wife was signed up. I cannot even begin to tell you what that meant. Because you never know. And I know plenty of people who thought they were in a great relationship, and then when this happened, they were abandoned. And I think number one is because we both had the same foundation of faith, that it just grew. The other thing that I do want to mention that I think is important is that my wife always talks about two things when she speaks. Number one is that she was going through such a tough time. When I was in the hospital, she didn't know how to think straight. And she's like, 1/16 Jewish. And so we always watch Fiddler on the Roof, kind of coming into every Thanksgiving. And for whatever reason, she had to have that on every night. And her best friend came over and just sat next to her, never said a word. And so you don't always have to have the right thing to say, but you just need to be there. And then the other thing I think that we noticed is how many people showed up, and I mean set up logistics for our kids, set up logistics for a man from either our church group or somebody that I knew or somebody I didn't know could sign up and sleep in a rollaway cot next to my bed every single night. And I got to tell you, that was one of the coolest things that anybody could have ever done for us. It's just that little sign-up sheet. And, you know, I would say that now whenever we're faced with somebody going through adversity, especially a very fast type of crisis, is that we always look to be that now for other people, to help them with logistics, to help them set up, you know, all the things. But between us, everything that doesn't matter gets wiped away. And it only goes down to the core. And it changed our viewpoint on the definition of family. And it just changed our thought process and all of that. And, you know, we still are a married couple, same things. Life's not perfect or whatever. But I think it just showed the foundation at the end of the day that we both had, but especially her towards me. And I think that it was part of the reason that my heart was broken in the middle of the night at Craig Hospital. Does that answer your question? I took the long route.
So at any point during your transformation, did you ever argue and scream at God?
I got to tell you, I don't know why this happened to me. It never did. And I know that's extremely rare. I'll try and phrase this in the fastest way possible. I feel like all of us are a garden. So what I mean by that is a garden is kind of a living, changing, multi-organism entity. And in it you have plants, trees, different things, hate, love, might have a beautiful tree of joy, and then you have these weeds of jealousy, anger, and that's what our gardens look like for the most part. And if your garden, number one, is to change that, just to make that garden stay the way it is a lot of work. To try to improve that garden is infinitely more work. If any of you garden, you know what I'm talking about. To keep that garden in the space or to change it how you want it. For me, it just got bladed. It just got scraped down and they took everything away. And so all those things about how I thought life was or life was supposed to be got just ripped apart. And I just watched. I was forced to lay in a green field and just sit there and watch and make new distinctions about what he wanted me to see. And I don't know why I never had a dark moment. I just didn't, and that was my experience. And you never know the experience you're going to have until you go through that door. And that was just mine.
There's a thread through your talk, Matt, that's challenging. Not because it's not true, it's because it's challenging to me. Right behind you, another mountain climb, blah, blah, journeying God in community. 10,000 people, or 5,000 people, tidal wave of prayer, people sitting at the foot of your cot, right? That's what broke you, that tidal wave, right? We have New Canaan Society and we have friends and we have guys, but I don't think I have, or I don't think too many people have that.
My dad, he was agnostic my entire life. And he was a doctor. And he just scientifically you can't prove there's a God, and I just don't know that there is one. And it was my accident that brought him eventually to Christ in the 11th hour of his life. Because he couldn't frame it in any other way. I just had to share that since it hit me. But I had the opportunity, and he told me this. He said, you have a really unique experience in which you've gained a lot of things back where most people don't. And he said it's a really unique experience that you're going to be able, if you really focus on things that you can share. And he said it, in a way, you've been to your own funeral because you saw how people reacted. And you're right. Again, it's my situation. Craig, they say every situation is like a snowflake because it is. And you're right. That was just my experience. And I don't know how I would be if I had a full terminal cut on my spinal cord and I wasn't moving, or if I didn't have the same amount of impact. Because one of the ways that they look at Craig is it's a family unit. You have to be in community, where if you don't have a community around you, you need that support system. Everybody has to be in there. That's part of their criteria on if they accept you or not, because they have a huge weight. And that was just, the only thing I can say is that was my experience going through what I went through, which is not the same for anybody else, and I get that.
Hey, man. Not that I need my microphone to talk to this distance, but so
I think I gotta stay
it's more
away
so
where they
people
scream.
can hear behind me. So, for me, as I'm listening to your story, here you're talking about this journey that you've been on. Your rehab took about approximately how long?
Well, it's still ongoing to this day.
Well, excuse me, to get you to the state that you're kind of moving around.
People even a year later would say, versus now, I look different, and just the move of fluidity. Still to this day, I don't know, first of all, how any of my spinal cord made it, but especially this left arm. When you see the nerve root comes out of a foramen, and that thing had gone like this. And I don't know how it is, but go ahead, I'm sorry.
Those questions are more just for a little bit about foundation. My question is really once you've experienced the support, what we refer to as a miracle, that you're in the state that you're in, and then you're surrounded by all these people, prayer, support, staff members, a growing of community, family that's coming about. But then you're kind of moving around on your own. There's an independent state that's coming about.
Yes.
And then there's soft moments that it's just you and God. Can you share a little bit about that time after? I mean, do you feel what I'm saying?
I am going to tell another small piece before mine, because I think it's so critical. And this is a really interesting piece. So I have spent a lot of time at Craig, and I number one is, you're right, it does change. But I asked them, what happens when, why do some people do so much better than the other? You have two people, identical injury, identical detriment, and one is doing great mentally, and one's doing horribly. What is it? Faith is number one. And then I said, but if you take faith away, what is it? And he goes, if I boiled it all down, it's one thing. Do they believe their parents love them or not? No matter if you're 15 or 50. I was not expecting that answer. Another part is that most patients from Craig, wherever they are mentally on their score, they're inpatient with high level of community, and they do this well. Then they go to outpatient, and then they go home. And about 16 to 18 months after they've left Craig, that's the dark valley that the majority of people face, because now it is that individual piece. And I'm very well aware of that. And as a matter of fact, my wife and I are working on something to actually address that. But for me, that went through COVID. That was going through COVID. It was like about 2 years in. And that was my single greatest summer of all. It was my wife's worst summer. She hated it. She was miserable. And it was my single greatest summer because of what that did. When I got bladed down, it started a journey for me that I'm like, I cannot stop going on this journey. And no matter what the thread was that I needed to pull on, I would pull on. It was that insatiable curiosity that just showed up on things that normally I wouldn't have paid a lot of attention to. First book I had to listen to, because I couldn't read it, I had to put it on my chest and press play, is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Had to do it. Couldn't stop. Couldn't not think about anything else but that. And if you all don't, does everyone know what that book is? And then other things just kept coming. And I think it's just that curiosity. And then I went inward, because at the end of the day, that was my time in the desert, that I needed to go inward and spend time with God, and it blossomed my relationship. And that would be my answer.
Matt, thank you for your testimony, your presentation. It reminded me of a time when I was 21 years old, I had Guillain-Barré syndrome, and I was completely paralyzed in a hospital at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. And I was not a Christian at the time, but it reminded me of a nurse that would come to me during the night, you know, and would just move my legs and my arms, you know, and she would pray for me. And she told me to visualize a time in your life when you were doing something you loved to do, which at that time was playing tennis. And I did, and I would do that. I would visualize that, and I was complete. And I believe God. I believe she was an angel. I believe God sent her as an angel to minister to me, and it really helped me. It helped to heal me, and I was able to walk out of there. I was in the hospital 6 weeks. I was able to walk out. I had rehab for 3 months, and I was able to go back to college. And I remember playing. I loved to just thinking I was playing. And I'm back at Syracuse College, and I was playing tennis with this beautiful blonde girl of my dormitory, and just thanking God. Here I am. Like I got through. You know, God got me through this. It made me. It made me want to be a Christian. And so your testimony really reminded me of that, and that I want to share that with people I know. So thank you. Thank you so much.
It's so true, and I think one of the things that you point out is so important for all of us, because you never know the moment that you decide to share Christ and to be Christ-like to another person, what it'll do. You really don't know, that one moment.
So, John, I got to clarify something. When you're playing tennis with the beautiful blonde, was that in the real life, or that was the visualization you were doing? Anybody else? Oh. The what?
Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So if you don't know, Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychologist that had the unfortunate experience of being at Auschwitz concentration camp. And he decided to write a third-party objective view on why people made it out of there in general. Because you could just look at a guard the wrong way and be shot one day. But in general, looking at how people either went one way and were able to persevere and make it through, and which has to do with purpose, and why the other ones didn't.
Others? Well, I had an insight when we talked yesterday that God has used you in ways beyond just sharing your testimony, and how he's using what you've been through to actually care for others. Can you just tell us a little bit about Thrive?
Oh, so this is something we were at my wife, it was awesome. We were at a Christian couples retreat, and we were doing an exercise, and she hated the exercise. She wanted nothing to do with it. She's like, this is dumb. So she went off into the corner, and she was doodling, and this idea slapped her across the face. And she came back and she told me about it, and I literally could not stop thinking about it. So we've worked on it for 2 years. When somebody comes to Craig or a hospital like Craig, the caregiver has to buy them an entirely new outfit. You need two shoe sizes that are 2 sizes larger because your feet swell, and then there's all kinds of clothing demands that you need, very specific specialty clothing, that they just hand you this giant list and say, go get this. My wife had to have somebody drive her around to try and go find some of these things, some of the stuff she got on Amazon. But what we decided to do is to make it a very neat, very easy thing that they will hand to the patient's caregiver, family member, and you'll just hit a QR code, and all those items will just show up, click, 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 done. Shows up at your hospital right when you need it, where you need it, and that's a really hard thing to do because of HIPAA. And because we're not dealing with a patient, we're dealing with their family member or caregiver, whoever that is. But it gives us a unique opportunity from a few different things. Number one is we're going to make the right type of clothing that they really need, and everything in the clothing world is going the different direction than what these people need, as well as some different things about it. But that other point is we know, as I shared, the mental health of patients over time. And what that's going to give us the ability to do is create a relationship with that primary caregiver that we will then translate. Our goal is to translate that to the patient themselves eventually, and start to build services and resources for the kingdom to minister to people within that realm. And I think that's going to be a huge underlying theme that we're going to be able to take advantage of.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming and being with us today.
Thank you.
And